There are a lot of video games out there that are based off of other media like comic books, anime, movies, TV shows, the list goes on. Anime games, however, are one common type of game that has been doing well compared to other video games based off of, say, movies. There are a lot of different anime that have had games based off of them. On the PS Vita, there have been games like Dragon Ball Z, Battle of Z, and One Piece Unlimited World Red. One category of anime games is video games based off of an anime that it makes sense to have a video game based off of it. One of the most recent animes that it would make sense to have a video game based on is Sword Art Online, because that anime is about a video game. Last year, the PS Vita got an exclusive Sword Art Online game called Sword Art Online Hollow Fragment, and that was a game set in the MMO atmosphere of the Sword Art Online universe. Now we have a new game that's out in Asia right now that has an English translation called Sword Art Online Lost Song, which is an action RPG that takes place in the Alfheim Online arc of the anime. Showing my very first English import review, here is my review of Sword Art Online Lost Song. The story of Lost Song takes place in a virtual reality MMORPG called Alfheim Online, which is taken from the second arc of the Sword Art Online anime. However, this is not a canon story with the anime. Rather, it is a direct sequel to the PS Vita game Sword Art Online Hollow Fragment. Despite the developers saying it was not a direct sequel, all of the dialogue in the game regarding a lot of the different characters that were in the original game, like Leafa, Philia, Stria, and others, make note and make mention of a lot of very spoilerish parts of Hollow Fragment's storyline. The story of Lost Song shows Kirito and his friends, Lisbeth, Asuna, and others, taking on a new updated area in the Alfheim Online game. The update added a lot of new floating islands, so all of them go through trying to clear it, completely unaware that there's another plot going on behind their backs. Now, the last thing we should talk about the story is the translation. The biggest complaint about Hollow Fragment was its shoddy English translation. Lost Song, in its Asian form, is an exceptional translation, even considering the standards of North America and Europe releases. Sword Art Online Lost Song is an action-oriented RPG as opposed to an offline MMO like Hollow Fragment was. While there are a lot of gameplay similarities like leveling up, party-based combat, and skill trees, there are a lot of new things and there are a lot of differences as you play through the game. The first two differences we should make note of are playable characters and aerial combat. In Hollow Fragment, you are forced to use Kirito and you can only control him no matter who you had in your party with you. In Lost Song, you can use any playable character as the party leader, except in specific instances where a story battle requires you to play as someone like Kirito or Asuna. But if you want to go through as your custom character, or as Asuna, or Leafa, or Agile, you can do that, and you can control them as the party leader. Now, aerial combat is another aspect of the game that is entirely new. A lot of the areas in Lost Song are very large and require you to fly through them. Flying can be done just by flying forward and up and down in a very rail-type fashion, or you can just hover and move around as you set up combos for attacks. But there are a lot of flying mechanics in the game outside of various dungeons. Skills and weapons are also something that has changed a lot. In the original game, Kirito could equip any weapon type he wanted. In this game, each character, whether they are a story character or a custom character, you have to go with their weapon proficiency. Each character or custom character has 3 different weapon types that they are proficient with, and that's all they can equip. Leafa, for example, can equip one-handed swords, rapiers, or katanas, so you cannot equip daggers or axes to her. Now, the biggest addition to skills is the addition of magic spells. Your character can learn various sword skills that they use their weapon for, but they can also learn magic. You can switch between weapon and magic mode with ease, and magic comes in different varieties. There are magic spells that do elemental damage, there are magic spells that do buffs, like increasing your MP regeneration or movement speed, and there are magic spells that will heal, like healing your entire party's HP, or reviving other party members that have already fallen in battle. When you progress through the game, you will have a town that is a base of sorts for you to use for various things. There is an inn where you can change your party members and save your game. There is a guild where you can accept and do quests and multiplayer quests. and there are various shops where you can buy and upgrade items and equipment. Finally, there is a teleport stone you can use to go out into the field. Progressing through the game's story will be a matter of talking to NPCs in town that have notifications over their head and progressing through the islands. Each island that you come across is a huge environment that you'll be able to roam and fly through to find various dungeons, items, NPCs to interact with for story events, as well as boss fights. The main progression will be that you'll get to a new island. You'll survey the island by flying around and looking at all of the various dungeons and monuments it has, and then you'll be progressing through it in a specific order to be able to go through and unlock new areas to eventually get to a final boss to unlock the next island. You'll be doing this over and over again, and it's not exactly the same. Some have you just going through dungeons, fighting mini bosses to a final boss, and others have limitations like an altitude limit where you can't fly very high and you'll need to do a few other things to collect items for a quest to get the final boss to appear. Now, combat has two different venues. You can fight enemies in the air, or you can fight enemies on the ground. Some of the dungeons require you to not be in the air at all and disables the flight feature, but when you're fighting enemies out in the field, and particular large boss fights, you will have the ability, and sometimes you're required to fly as you fight the enemies. This is different because the combat on the ground and in the air is not the same. While skills will do the same thing whether you're on foot or in the air, your regular melee attacks will be different. So it's good to experiment around with these things so you'll be better prepared for when you get thrown into a boss fight that requires you to be in the air. The difficulty of the game does vary. There are 3 different difficulty settings: easy, normal, and hard. If you stick on easy and normal, the game's not going to be that hard. If you're on normal, some of the later bosses will give you a little bit of trouble until you learn their attack patterns, but hard mode is really where the only challenge in the game lies. Hard mode is where you can go in and bosses will pretty much one-hit KO you. Now, the good thing is you can change this every time you go back to the title screen. The good thing about this is that there are 2 ways of leveling up in the game. You can level up by gaining experience from defeating enemies, which will increase your HP and unlock new skills, but skills must be leveled up by being used. So, if you want to go in easy mode, you can do that to get some quick levels to increase your HP and MP if you're running really low in boss fights. Or you can go into hard mode so that each enemy will be a lot harder to take down, so you'll be able to hit them with a lot more skills to level up your skills faster. Now, one final thing to note is the online multiplayer. Sword Art Online Lost Song is equipped with online co-op features for quests and exploring the main story. The good thing about this is that it is not region locked. You can go into the Asia version of the game, you can upload cross-save data, you can jump online with anyone in the world, and you'll be just fine. In fact, I played with someone from Singapore just a week ago, and everything went fine. The smart thing about the online is that when someone joins your room, or you look at the rooms you can join, it shows the connection level. That way, if there's a low connection room, you can avoid that room so you won't have a laggy game. All in all, the game should last you about 20 or 30 hours. Some people will have more, some people will have less to clear the main story. After you do clear the main story, you will have a substantial amount of post-game content, including more story content to go through. It's not nearly as long as Hollow Fragment was, but it's got a good amount of content in it for an action RPG. I normally don't talk about controls in video reviews, but there is one aspect of controls that is worth mentioning, and that is the camera. Every once in a while in the game, especially in boss fights and closed areas, the camera will prove to be a bit of an annoyance. As long as you're locked onto an enemy, the camera will constantly try to look at the enemy no matter where you are. This leads to a lot of very frustrating points where the camera will get stuck on a wall, and the only way to get out of it and see what's going on is to take off the lock-on and just fight manually. I normally would not mention something like this, but since it happens dozens of times as I play through the game, it is definitely worth mentioning, and it is definitely very annoying. Now, as far as the presentation is concerned, Lost Song does look very good for a Vita RPG. The environments around you are practically flawless. There are some jagged edges on the character models, but they still look very good. The load times are pretty short as well. Despite the huge environments that it loads, you should never have a load time that's more than 7 or 8 seconds long. The main downer about the performance is the frame rate. If you remember, there were some frame rate issues in Hollow Fragment when you were going through dungeons. It is very similar to this in Lost Song, but not quite as severe or frequent. Every once in a while, when you're in a room with a huge number of enemies or with a number of bosses, you will notice an occasional frame drop. It's not anywhere near as bad as it was in Hollow Fragment, but it happens every once in a while, so it's worth noting. Sword Art Online Lost Song is the newest game based off of the hit VR MMO anime series. On the downside, the camera can be bothersome at times, and there are occasional frame drops in the dungeons. Outside of this is a fun action RPG with a lot to do, fully functional online multiplayer with no region lock, and a translation that is far superior to its predecessor. PlayStation Vita Reviews rates Sword Art Online Lost Song an 8 out of 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to in the comment section below, or head to the site and forum at vitareviews.net and forum.vitareviews.net.